For 17 May, the title of the Emmett Fox writing was Get Some Demonstrations. And demonstration to him is the divine showing the power in response to you. So he writes, the royal road to progress in spiritual understanding is to solve definite problems by prayer. Every time you heal any condition, however small, by prayer, you gain an increase in spiritual understanding. One definite healing will teach you more about spiritual truth than hours of discussion or reading. Some questions in metaphysics that readily present themselves cannot be answered without a good deal of preparation, and it is useless to try to answer them until this ground has been covered. It is useless for a student of algebra to try to understand binomial theorem if he hardly understands a simple equation. You always have enough understanding to get freedom and harmony here and now in the place where you are. And then a quote from the King James Version, because that's what he uses. Because thou hast asked for thyself understanding to discern judgment, lo, I have given thee a wise and understanding heart. Now the Lamsa translation, and I left a little bit more in, and the Lord said to Solomon, because you have asked for yourself wisdom to discern judgment, behold, I have done according to your words. Lo, I have given you a wise and understanding heart. Yay for that. So this topic came about when I was watching a YouTube video of rebuilding a car engine. Dave's Auto in Utah, someplace or other, has a lot of videos where they show broken down car engines and take them apart, show what went wrong and how to fix them. And in one of them, in the midst of talking about this particularly troubled vehicle, he became philosophical. And he talked about how he had basically started from nothing and he was still in the same geographical spot that he'd started 36 years ago. And he pointed to a small house over at the far end of the property, and that's where he raised his children. And then the small garage that he started with, and then the big garage he now owns when the tire company went out of business, all in the same geographic spot. And then he said, you tend to take the simple things in life for granted until you don't have them. For instance, this was, he was speaking this last February. Our city has never recorded this little snowfall ever. So our state is going to be in a bind for water. I never thought about my health until my shoulder needed surgery. And then he went on, so what are you taking for granted in your life? Your relationship, your job, your boss, your friend, your neighbor? Maybe you should be thinking and praying for them. And that sat with me. You know, we've talked about gratitude, keeping gratitude logs, but taking for granted was a different approach. And then, you know how God puts things in front of you. A day or two after that, I was cleaning out some books that no longer have value. And one of them was a thing called footnotes. I was curious what that was. I opened it up, and it was a series of essays. And the first one was titled Beefsteak and No Teeth. And the writer talks about some years previous to his writing, he was traveling with his father in West Texas, and he'd suggested that at the next town they stop at a good hotel and have a nice beefsteak dinner. And he says, my father said I could use a nice juicy steak, but I have no teeth to chew it with. And he went on to talk about how easily from day to day we get so busy that we forget to take the opportunities to enjoy life until it gets so late in our lives we can no longer enjoy what once was a pleasure to us. And he talks about a set of parents he knew who were so busy making money, rising in the world, so they could have time with their children, that by the time they achieved their goal, the children were adults and they no longer had children to spend time with. Or Charles Darwin was interested in music. He loved to listen to music, good classical music, and to make music. But by the time he was done with all of his writing and studying for natural sciences, he found he no longer had the pleasure for music. And the point of this particular editorial was, don't let the day-to-day rush crowd out your determination to do things you wanted to do just for the joy of doing them. The only day you have is today. And that's where the risk of taking for granted comes in. And I'm going to expand it beyond just day-to-day things, but this writing reminded me of an anecdote I came across about the great Oliver Wendell Holmes. He was, for those of you who don't know him, he was a great jurist. He was on the Supreme Court till he was 90, the longest sitting Supreme Court justice ever. And the story is that he and a 70-year-old friend were walking down the street when a very attractive young lady passed by them going the other way. And they both instinctively turned to watch her go. And the 70-year-old said, "Oh, to be 60 again." And Oliver Wendell Holmes said, "Oh, to be 80 again." So that's acknowledging what we've taken for granted, if you will, or what we have lost for taking for granted. Now, that's the physical, the worldly side. I want to look, expand into the spiritual side of life, because we're just as likely, or maybe even more likely, to take things for granted there, or humankind is. We, I think, are more sensitive, but nonetheless, we're at risk. So the first thing I did was look up in Google AI to have it compile what it is, the definition for spiritual taking for granted. And it came back with, spiritual taking for granted is the complacent, unappreciative, or indifferent attitude toward life, blessings, and divine grace. It involves forgetting the source of blessings and falling into entitlement, often leading to spiritual backsliding or a dulling of wonder. Practicing gratitude, humility, and acknowledging that everything is a gift is the primary remedy. And as I was reading this to myself, I thought of the Lawrence Ferlinghetti poem, "And I am waiting for a rebirth of wonder." If you haven't read it recently, it is available online. Just look up, "I am waiting for a rebirth of wonder." But that's what happens when you take for granted. You lose the sense of wonder. In a sense, you become numb to the spiritual gifts we've been given. You become unresponsive to divine grace, to divine nudges. And that shifts our whole attitude and certainly limits our ability to experience joy and happiness here. The Bible itself does warn against indifference and suggests that appropriate acts of spiritual thanksgiving can combat this tendency to just accept as read. But if we move into spiritual blindness, if we're just plodding ahead in this life, ultimately we're going to lose the ability to appreciate the gifts that we're given. And as I was looking for ideas to put in this, I came across a small poem by Michelle Weimer, 4 lines. Another day, another blessing, and another chance at life. Take nothing for granted and think of every breath as a gift. And she suggests in a commentary that we reframe from taking things for granted and considering them as things as granted to us, that we have been gifted. And thus we can move our awareness from sort of a ho-hum attitude to a sense of gratitude and humility for having been gifted, for continuing to receive gifts. And that is a path that should be part of our spiritual path, to stop, take in the majesty of what God has created, take in the joy of the gifts that we are given, even the subtle gifts, and adopt an attitude of thankfulness. Recognize that we don't need to be receiving this. It's, while we're children of God, that doesn't mean that we automatically get it here. Particularly those of us who've had troubled childhood, other bad experiences, and have been taught that we're undeserving. I have a longtime friend who, anytime he talks, I hear him basically saying, I don't deserve to be happy. He does a lot of good in the world, but he lives a life that is so shorn of what is ours by God-given right, by the fact that we are God stuff. And every once in a while I mention something, but he won't hear it. He won't hear it. This is the path he has chosen. So watch your path. Don't be walking away from the gifts as given. Because if we do, our perspective about life, our sense of connection with the divine and with all of humanity and with this earth become distorted. We can become jaded. We can tend to lose our sense of right and wrong, of morality. And easy enough to start grumbling. And the being aware even of the small gifts reminds me, for those of you who were here last week, you'll remember I read a poem by Mary Oliver. There's 3 stanzas that I want to bring in here, because this is the kind of don't take for granted I want you thinking about. She wrote, and you will hear the air itself like a beloved whisper, oh, let me for a while longer enter the 2 beautiful bodies of your lungs. Even there, we're at risk of taking for granted until we start losing the ability to welcome the air into our lungs. So not only events such as life and breath, but also people. How often we take for granted until they're not here. I don't know how much I took Bob Voges for granted. I certainly appreciated him. But now that he's gone, I'm even more aware of how much he contributed to our small gathering here. So a quote from scripture, Psalm 90. So teach us to number our days that we may get a heart of wisdom. which Lamsa translates as, "So teach us to number our days, that we may apply our hearts to wisdom." And think on that as a daily meditative practice, which reminds me, I don't know how many of you have had the pleasure of it, seeing produced or reading Dylan Thomas's play Under Milkwood. But among the denizens of this small town is a little old lady, Mary Ann Sailors. And each morning when she awoke, she would throw open her window and yell out to the world, "I am 85 years, 3 months, and 2 days old," or whatever it was. She appreciated every day. Let us appreciate the gift of every day, the gift of breath and relative health every day. I have met too many people whose lives, physical lives, are constant pain, or whose emotional lives are constant pain. And in too many cases, they just accept it. They're turning down the gifts. They're taking for granted that they will always be in pain. That doesn't need to be the case. We don't need to do it. We can walk the way I think of it. If we are walking in unceasing prayer, in unceasing connection with the divine, with the shamanic or the divine side of life, then that also means we should be feeling blessed for each small positive in our lives. And as I was writing this, I found myself thinking of the fairly miserable life I lived for much of my life. And I took it for granted that was misery and that was it. But reframing, as gifted, if I had not gone through those painful experiences, if I had not had the courage to decide something else could happen, if I had not been able to hear the divine direct my footsteps here or there or someplace else to heal, I could not now be writing a book on a process to heal people that can help the world. So I now take all those experiences as gifted, and I'm grateful for them. So that said, let me run through a few gifts, shall we say. First of all, everyone is here has been given a day, have been given a day today. And we presume we'll be given a day tomorrow, but we're not promised it. You know, every one of us here has the gift of existence out of billions and billions of possibilities of what could have happened from the combination of all the different genes and RNAs that came up through our families to this moment. Each and every one of us here, because you're here, has chosen, has experienced, expects to experience divine connection, divine wisdom, divine input. Those are things that should not be taken for granted. They should be joyed over. All of us at some point or other have experienced divine healing, divine guidance. We all experience divine love showing up in our lives one way or another, as gifted. Now, those of you who walk with shamanic animals, do you accept them, take them for granted, or do you give them thanks and the divine thanks for their presence in your life? Those of you who have a spiritual gift that you use, do you take the time to acknowledge that it's more than just taking for granted? When you find yourself just walking through the fog of the future, reasonably, fearlessly, don't take that for granted. Own the fact that you are lucky enough. You have been gifted with courage, the willingness to gain insight, the fact that you are here means you're open to learning, growing in this lifetime, and creating something better. On the physical side, most of us at least, have working heat, air conditioning, toilets, showers, sinks, a place to cook, sufficient clothing. We've had relatively good weather. We haven't been hit by floods or storms. I don't think any of us has. Well, Karen got close to it, but even she was protected from the big flood, as I recall. They went near you, but didn't hit you. And it's one thing to say, yeah, cool. It's another to say, to recognize and give the credit to the divine. And those of you who are lucky enough to have a happy, positive, nurturing childhood, don't take it for granted. Give thanks. There's another quote from the Bible from Joshua. Have I not commanded you, be strong and courageous, do not tremble or be dismayed, for the Lord your God is with you for wherever you go. Or Lamsa, behold, I have commanded you, be strong and of good courage, fear not, neither be dismayed, for your God is with you wherever you go. Do not take for granted that God is with us wherever we go. There are more than enough people out here who lack any sense or hope of that. We have that as a gift, and it is something that we should acknowledge rather than taking for granted. And then also from Joshua, let the beauty of the Lord our God be upon us, for the work of his hands made us, yea, he made us by the work of his hands. Now, I have a list of things we can do to counteract our tendency to take things for granted. I'm not going to list them here, but I will send them out this evening so that perhaps they'll have some ideas that would be useful to you. And folks, that's what I have to say tonight. Anybody with a contribution? Yes, Lori Kay.
Thank you, Brian. Appreciate that talk. Taking things for granted resonated in terms of there's two ways that can be heard. Don't take things for granted. I can hear that as an injunction. I guess that's the right word. You know, like, don't screw up. You know, and that's not helpful. That's just not helpful, because that's another layer of self-punishment in the end. I can also hear it from the place that I like to hear it the best, which is, where can I stand in relationship to what's going on that I'm going to feel good or interested or fulfilled or curious or something other than self-abusive. And that actually happened for me today. I did my first wedding officiating yesterday, and it went very well, but it also thrust me into grief. And rather than try to fix it, try to get out of it, try not to feel it, try to move through it, this morning, through some alchemy, I decided to allow myself to feel it and to just walk in it. And so it's been quite the remarkable day, and it feels like the way that we should all be living, instead of pushing stuff away or trying to fix it or just like trying to not be present with. So I'm not so interested in gratitude as a concept because it puts me into that fight or flight. But I love the concept. I love the idea of let me learn more and more how to just be the womb into which I unfold, regardless of what shape that circumstance takes.
Thank you. Somebody else with a contribution? Okay, Leah?
Well, what Lori Kate just said about being an open wound, it reminded me of that story about, I don't remember all the details, but it came to where a pot, pottery, whatever, it was carrying water and then, got cracks in it, whatever. And what they would do is reseal it, but it was like resealed with gold. So it had veins of gold going through this pottery piece that held water. And that symbolized, you might have an open wound, but it allows you to reheal it with something beautiful, and it end up becoming a more beautiful piece of pottery, which is what we are. We're all made, well, according to the Bible, we're all made from clay or whatever. But we all have wounds, whether it's childhood, elementary school, high school, later years, whatever. But it all depends on how we heal it and allow it to become part of us, which makes us beautiful and unique as we are. That we can go forth and people see the beauty of what's inside you and shines out and make it more sturdy. You're more sturdy. You're more who you are.
Thank you. Okay, Ellie?
Thank you for that talk, Brian. There's, I know we don't mean to, but there are things that we do take for granted. We take for granted getting up in the mornings. We take for granted that, as you were saying, the physical things that we have. And, we don't do it on purpose. We have food in the cabinet. That's great. Or, we have gas in the car. That's great. But I mean, I can remember a time when I've had to start over more than once. And those basic things I had to acquire again and again. I had to acquire housing. I lived in a DV shelter for 2 years. I lost everything. So I thought, but yet during those 2 years, I learned lessons that I wouldn't, that I don't take for granted. I learned how to find resources. I learned, more about nature and the interconnection that I have with it. And, even my spiritual walk, because there were women that I met that came in that were literally destitute. They didn't know who they were. They didn't know how they got there. And it was just like, wow. And so it gave me, more empathy, if you can get that. And a couple of the women there knew my story, and they asked me, they go, how can you be so happy with everything you lost? And I go, well, how can I be so sad with everything I'm gaining? So thank you. And one of the things that I've often not taken for granted, but just kind of thought, oh, everybody can do this, has been able to make things simplified. You know, I can usually look at a situation and go, oh, that's what that means. You know, in the last couple of months, there's been situations where I haven't been able to do that. And it's like, well, no, maybe I'm not supposed to learn that right now. So put it on a shelf and wait for the lesson. And to me, that's difficult. So when you went through today and, you know, talked and simplified what the things meant, and I'm like, oh, that's different way of looking at it. So thank you for reminding us of the simple things and, you know, taking as granted the things we have.
Thank you. We thank you for joining us. I will send out the list of ideas for moving away from taking for granted. I do remind you that we need some donations. I don't know what our finances are this month, but from what little have heard, I think we're well behind what we need to pay our bills this month. So thank you for being. Thank you for praying with us, for sharing with us, for being part of this community. We thank the divine for showering good on all of us, for guiding our steps, for granting us more wisdom and more awareness of all the good that surrounds us. We give full gratitude to the divine for all the good in our lives and for being part of this community. We say thank you to the divine. Thank you, and we'll see you all next week.